What if I shared that the boldest declarations in the annals of Japan's naval past were spoken a mere 25 minutes before one of history's most devastating maritime catastrophes? On the 25th of October, 1944, in the deep twilight preceding dawn, the battleship Fusso stood poised to engage in what would tragically become the very last fleet action between battleships ever recorded. Yet, these pronouncements were far more than casual boasts. They signified the final, defiant breaths of an Imperial Navy's pride, uttered by men who understood their voyage was towards inevitable destruction, yet they pressed onward nonetheless. Tonight, we delve into the depths of the Battle of Surigao Strait, a place where the ancient warrior's code of Bushido met the overwhelming might of American industrial power, resulting in the most one-sided naval confrontation of the Second World War. This is the account of how Japan's supposedly invincible battleship transformed into a watery grave for 1,620 sailors, and how the final words of defiance morphed into history's most cruel paradox. The Fusso was conceived from Japan's grand ambitions for maritime dominance. Commissioned in 1914 as the flagship of its class, it embodied the zenith of the Imperial Japanese Navy's aspirations, formidable, aesthetically striking, and utterly unique. With its distinctive tiered mast, a steel cathedral piercing the heavens, the Fusso was once hailed as the most heavily armed battleship on Earth. Its 12 14-inch cannons possessed the capacity to launch shells, each weighing as much as a small automobile, over 13 miles with devastating precision. However, by October of 1944, 30 years after its debut, the Fusso had become an anachronism. While American shipyards churned out modern battleships armed with 16-inch guns and sophisticated radar, Japan's mountain castle, the literal meaning of its name, was thrust into a conflict armed with technology from a bygone era. It could barely achieve 24 knots on a calm sea. Its defensive plating was antiquated, and its targeting systems were rudimentary compared to the adversary awaiting it in the Surigao Strait. Yet, herein lies the peculiar paradox that defined this engagement. Every soul involved understood it was a mission of certain doom, but they sailed forth regardless. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, commanding from the bridge of the Fusso's sister vessel, the Yamashiro, had received intelligence that very afternoon from aerial reconnaissance detailing the colossal American fleet lying in wait. 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, 28 destroyers, and 39 PT boats were poised in ambush. The arithmetic was stark and terrifying. Nishimura commanded 2 aging battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 4 destroyers, pitted against overwhelming odds. To grasp the sheer scale of events that unfolded in the Surigao Strait, we must first comprehend the men who sailed into it. The tradition of the Japanese Navy, which shaped officers like Nishimura, was forged in the inferno of the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Togo's fleet achieved the seemingly impossible, utterly annihilating the Russian Baltic Fleet in one of history's most decisive naval triumphs. This victory became the foundational myth of Japanese naval power, cultivating a generation of officers who believed that superior fighting spirit could surmount any material disadvantage. Nishimura perfectly personified this ethos, renowned for his unwavering obedience to orders and his readiness to sacrifice all for the emperor. He was precisely the sort of commander who would advance into certain death if duty dictated. His peers characterized him as an individual who would execute any command, irrespective of the personal cost or the impact on his men. This was not born of recklessness. It was the logical culmination of a military culture that prioritized honor above survival. The crew of the Fusso shared this mindset. These were not reluctant conscripts, they were seasoned naval professionals who had dedicated years to mastering the traditions of the Imperial Navy. Many had served together through the initial triumphs of the Pacific War, when Japanese naval might appeared unassailable. They had observed from the periphery as newer vessels claimed glory in engagements at Midway and the Philippine Sea, perpetually anticipating their own opportunity to demonstrate that the older ships still possessed formidable fighting capabilities. But an additional layer fueled their resolve: desperation. By October of 1944, Japan's predicament was dire, and this was universally understood. The combined fleet had been systematically decimated over the preceding 2 years. Experienced pilots were gone, fuel was critically low, and America's industrial might was producing warships at a rate that outstripped Japan's capacity to sink them. Operation Shogo, the desperate gambit that dispatched Nishimura's flotilla to the Surigao Strait, represented Japan's final chance to inflict significant damage upon the American fleet and potentially compel a negotiated peace. The engagement in the Surigao Strait encapsulated several profound themes extending well beyond military strategy. At its heart, this was a clash between two fundamentally divergent military philosophies: the Japanese emphasis on spiritual fortitude versus the American reliance on technological superiority and overwhelming material advantage. The Japanese doctrine was deeply rooted in centuries of samurai tradition, adapted for modern naval warfare. The concept of Yamato Damashi, the indomitable Japanese spirit, posited that courage, perseverance, and a willingness to embrace death could overcome any obstacle. This was not merely propaganda, it was a deeply ingrained conviction that had yielded miraculous outcomes in past conflicts. The critical failing by 1944 was that the gulf in material capability had widened so dramatically that spirit alone was no longer sufficient. The American forces lying in wait in the Surigao Strait embodied the antithesis of this philosophy. They placed their faith in technology and overwhelming numerical superiority to secure victory. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf had meticulously arranged his vessels in a classic crossing the T formation, a tactical maneuver enabling his entire battle line to bring its guns to bear simultaneously, while the Japanese could only engage with their forward turrets. More critically, his ships were equipped with advanced radar systems capable of tracking and targeting enemy vessels in absolute darkness, leaving the Japanese to fight effectively blind. This technological chasm would prove decisive, yet it also exposed a disquieting facet of contemporary warfare. The ensuing battle was so overwhelmingly one-sided that it scarcely qualified as combat. It more closely resembled an execution. The Japanese fought with desperate bravery, but valor could not surmount the fundamental reality of being outgunned, outnumbered, and engaged with obsolete armaments against an adversary capable of discerning their approach from 20 miles away. The poignant irony was that both sides were fully cognizant of this disparity beforehand. The Americans acknowledged their overwhelming advantage, while the Japanese were acutely aware of their near-total lack thereof. Nevertheless, the engagement proceeded, driven by the inexorable logic of total war and competing notions of honor. As the Japanese fleet approached the Surigao Strait in the pre-dawn hours of October 25th, Nishimura was confronted with agonizing choices and insufficient intelligence. His reconnaissance had apprised him of the awaited foe, but the broader strategic panorama remained obscure. Admiral Kurida's main force was scheduled to attack through the San Bernardino Strait concurrently, orchestrating a pincer movement that might divide the American defenses. Nishimura's sacrifice would only gain strategic relevance if it facilitated Kurida's success. The Japanese tactical approach was designed to maximize the psychological impact of their assault. Naval doctrine posited that American forces, despite their technological prowess, lacked the spiritual fortitude for protracted combat. If the Japanese could sow chaos and confusion, inflicting substantial casualties in the process, they might shatter American morale, thereby creating opportunities for the primary assault force. This was not mere wishful thinking, it was grounded in a meticulous analysis of American behavior in prior engagements. Nishimura's specific strategy entailed deploying his destroyers as expendable scouts and torpedo platforms, while conserving his battleships for a decisive gunnery duel with the American battle line. He believed that in close-quarters combat, where radar advantages would be mitigated, The superior Japanese night fighting techniques and crew proficiency could level the playing field. His officers had undergone extensive drills in night combat, utilizing methodologies refined during the Guadalcanal campaign. The proposed solution, from a Japanese perspective, was to generate maximum disruption and inflict maximum damage, even at the cost of a complete annihilation. Every American vessel damaged or sunk in the Surigao Strait would represent one fewer ship available to oppose the main Japanese offensive. Every minute the Americans expended confronting Nishimura's force was a minute denied to their preparation against Kurita. This was not simply a military calculation, it was a form of strategic immolation that honored Japanese principles of duty while serving tangible objectives. Captain B's role within this strategy was particularly critical. As the commander of the force's most formidable vessel, he was tasked with positioning the Fusso for maximum effectiveness, while preserving its combat readiness until the opportune moment. His gunnery officers had meticulously computed firing solutions for a spectrum of scenarios, prepared to engage multiple targets concurrently if required. The ship's damage control teams had rehearsed emergency protocols, fully aware that they would likely encounter catastrophic damage before the engagement concluded. However, this strategy hinged on flawless timing and communication, neither of which the Japanese possessed. The imposition of radio silence, maintained to preserve tactical surprise, prevented the three Japanese naval elements, Nishimura's force, Admiral Shima's trailing contingent, and Kurita's principal body, from coordinating their actions. They were engaged in disparate skirmishes rather than a unified campaign. The American solution was elegantly straightforward and devastatingly effective. Leverage superior technology and numerical strength to establish an overwhelming advantage, then execute a textbook naval engagement. Rear Admiral Oldendorf positioned his formations to maximize their firepower while minimizing any potential Japanese advantages. PT boats were tasked with harassing and reporting enemy movements. Destroyers would launch torpedo attacks under the cover of darkness. Finally, the battle line would deliver the decisive blow through coordinated gunfire. Oldendorf's deployment represented decades of naval tactical evolution distilled into a singular formation. His 6 battleships, West Virginia, Tennessee, California, Maryland, Mississippi, and Pennsylvania, were arrayed in a classic line of battle guarding the northern ingress to the strait. 5 of these vessels were survivors of the attack on Pearl Harbor, their crews galvanized by personal recollections of December 7th, 1941. Their state-of-the-art radar-directed fire control systems could track and engage targets at distances previously unimaginable mere years prior. The cruiser formations flanking the battleships provided supplementary firepower and tactical adaptability. Meanwhile, the destroyer squadrons were positioned to exploit their speed and torpedo armament. This was not merely an overwhelming application of force, it was overwhelming force wielded with surgical precision and technological superiority. What rendered this strategy particularly effective was its adept utilization of radar technology. While the Japanese struggled to identify targets in the darkness, American radar operators could meticulously track every vessel in Nishimura's flotilla and predict their movements with deadly accuracy. This technological edge transformed what might have been a chaotic, nocturnal engagement into a systematic dismantling of enemy forces. The Americans could conduct their battle as if it were daytime, compelling their adversaries to fight in conditions of near-total blindness. The Battle of Surigao Strait compels us to contemplate profound questions regarding the nature of courage, duty, and the moral calculus inherent in warfare. Was Nishimura's decision to advance, despite insurmountable odds, an act of noble sacrifice, or a senseless squandering of human lives? The answer is largely contingent upon one's perspective on military honor and the responsibilities of command. From a Japanese viewpoint, Nishimura's conduct was exemplary. He received orders to engage the American fleet in Leyte Gulf and discharged those orders with unwavering devotion, fighting until his vessel was destroyed and he went down with it. His demise, alongside that of his entire crew, epitomized the highest ideals of Bushido, the warrior's path, which mandated absolute commitment and the acceptance of death in service to duty. However, from a contemporary standpoint, this same conduct appears tragically wasteful. Nishimura was aware that his mission was essentially a suicide endeavor, yet he made no attempt to preserve his forces or explore alternative strategies that might have achieved strategic objectives with a reduced loss of life. His rigid adherence to orders, while commendable in its dedication, resulted in the unnecessary deaths of over 3,000 Japanese sailors who might have otherwise survived to fight more effectively on another occasion. The American actions, while tactically brilliant, also raised disquieting questions. The technological disparity was so vast that the engagement bore a resemblance to a modern military force confronting a medieval army. American radar-directed ordnance could annihilate Japanese vessels before they could even ascertain the location of their attackers, creating a scenario where courage and skill were rendered irrelevant. This was not a contest between equals. It was technological dominance crushing human resolve. Perhaps most unsettling is the broader context of this battle within the twilight of the Pacific War. By October of 1944, Japan's defeat was a foregone conclusion. The strategic landscape was utterly hopeless. Japanese industry could no longer replenish its losses, and American forces were advancing towards the Japanese mainland. In this context, engagements such as the Surigao Strait devolved into exercises in prolonging suffering rather than meaningful military operations. Nevertheless, we must also consider the alternatives that existed. Japan's military leadership genuinely believed that inflicting grievous casualties upon American forces might pave the way for a negotiated peace that would preserve some degree of Japanese sovereignty. From their perspective, every battle fought, every vessel sacrificed, represented an investment aimed at averting total conquest and occupation. Precisely at 3:52 a.m. on October 25th, 1944, as American projectiles rained down upon his burning flagship, Vice Admiral Nishimura transmitted his final radio message, a communication destined to become one of the most poignant documents of the Pacific War. Unaware that his sister ship, the battleship Fusso, had already submerged 20 minutes prior, he issued the command, "Fusso, come up and join the battle at full speed." The reply he anticipated never materialized. The Fusso lay shattered on the seabed of the Surigao Strait, its hull rent asunder by American torpedoes, its magazines inundated, its proud pagoda mast pointing impetuously towards the surface. Of its complement of 1,630 officers and men, a mere 10 would survive to witness the dawn. The vessel that Japan had confidently proclaimed would never founder had become a steel coffin in less than an hour. Yet, perhaps the most haunting aspect of this tragedy lies not in the sheer magnitude of the loss, but in what it represented. The Battle of Surigao Strait marked the definitive end of an epoch in naval warfare. Never again would battleships engage in a line of battle, exchanging salvos until one combatant was obliterated. The era of the capital ship had concluded, vanquished not by enemy action, but by technological obsolescence and evolving strategic realities. Nishimura's final dispatch, summoning a vessel that could no longer respond, became a potent metaphor for Japan's overall predicament. In 1944, the empire was invoking strengths it no longer possessed, relying on traditions that no longer offered solutions, and fighting battles that were irretrievably lost. The confident pronouncements regarding the Fusso's invincibility had, within the span of 40 minutes, transformed into history's most pitiless irony. Today, both the Fusso and the Yamashiro rest on the ocean floor of the Surigao Strait. Their submerged hulks are explored by deep-sea researchers who marvel at the engineering ingenuity that brought them into being and the brutal forces that brought about their destruction. Their crews are remembered not as failures, but as individuals who confronted insurmountable odds with unwavering valor. They sailed into assured demise because duty demanded it, carrying with them the aspirations and traditions of a fading empire. The Battle of Surigao Strait serves as a stark reminder that while technological superiority may be decisive in conflict, it cannot negate the human toll of warfare. Every projectile that found its mark, every torpedo that struck home, represented not merely tactical success, but human tragedy on an industrial scale. The American victory was unequivocal and essential for bringing the war to a close. However, it came at the cost of thousands of lives lost in service to competing visions of honor, duty, and national preservation. Ultimately, the battleship Fusso did indeed sink, just as its designers had always harbored fears she might. But she sank fighting, her guns firing until the sea claimed her. Her crew maintained their posts until the very last moment. This, perhaps, is the only form of immortality any warship can claim. Not invincibility, but the courage to confront impossible odds and face inevitable defeat with dignity intact. The final battleship duel in history lasted less than 20 minutes of actual gunnery engagement. Yet, its repercussions continue to resonate through military history, reminding us that while nations and technologies win wars, they are fought by individuals whose courage transcends the causes they serve. In the Surigao Strait, on that somber October morning, the Age of Heroes concluded alongside the Age of Battleships, not with triumph or defeat, but with the stark, grim arithmetic of modern warfare.